The story of our past is a grand and comforting edifice. It is built from the dust of fallen empires and the careful scholarship of generations, its halls lined with artifacts neatly labeled and displayed behind velvet ropes. We walk through these halls, read these textbooks, and accept a narrative that feels both logical and complete. A story of linear progress. Humanity awakens slowly. We see the first spark of fire, the first sharpened stone. We learn to cultivate the land, to build villages and then cities of mud and brick. Great empires rise and fall, each one building upon the knowledge of the last. A slow, steady, and unbroken march of civilization from the cave to the cosmos. It is a story that makes sense. It is the story we all know. But what if it's not the whole story? What if, in the foundations of that grand edifice, there are cracks? What if, in the forgotten corners of museum storage rooms and buried deep beneath the earth, there are objects that whisper a different tale? Artifacts of impossible complexity. Structures of monumental scale built by people who shouldn't have had the means. Maps that chart coastlines hidden under miles of ice. These are the glitches in our historical matrix. For centuries, they have been dismissed as hoaxes, misinterpreted as ritual objects, or simply ignored because they don't fit. The official narrative has no room for a 2,000-year-old analog computer or a megalithic temple built 6,000 years before Stonehenge. It has no explanation for precision-cut stonework that rivals modern machinery, or ancient batteries that could have generated a current thousands of years before Volta. To acknowledge them is to accept a profoundly unsettling idea, that the clear, straight line of human progress might be an illusion, that our modern era may not be the pinnacle of human achievement, but perhaps a recovery, a rebuilding from a past so advanced and so devastatingly lost that only phantom echoes remain. These anomalies are not mere curiosities, they are a challenge, a trail of breadcrumbs leading us back into a history we were never meant to know, suggesting a lost chapter of the human story, a prequel that could change everything we think we know about ourselves. And so, we must look past the comfort of the accepted story and dare to ask the forbidden questions. We must become detectives of deep time, sifting through the evidence that has been left behind. Our journey does not begin in a library, reading from an accepted text, but in the crushing, silent darkness of the deep sea. It is there, amongst the remnants of a Roman shipwreck, that the first piece of impossible evidence was recovered, a discovery that would prove the ancient world was far more brilliant and far more mysterious than we could ever have imagined.
The sapphire waters of the Aegean, a realm of myth, heroes, and gods. For millennia, these seas have guarded the secrets of fallen empires, swallowing fleets and fortunes, preserving them in a silent, watery grave. It was here, near the Greek island of Antikythera, in the year 1900, that a team of sponge divers, blown off course by a storm, stumbled upon one of history's most profound enigmas. They had found an ancient Roman shipwreck, a treasure vessel lost to the waves in the 1st century BCE. Alongside magnificent bronze and marble statues, amphorae, and glassware, they recovered a curious object that was largely ignored. It was an unassuming lump of corroded bronze and splintered wood, about the size of a large dictionary. For decades, it sat in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, believed to be little more than a piece of a broken statue, or perhaps a navigational tool of simple design. No one could have possibly imagined the truth, that locked within that calcified shell was a vision of the cosmos so advanced, so impossibly complex, that its discovery would shatter our understanding of the ancient world. Decades of painstaking research, aided by the advent of advanced X-ray and CT scanning technology, slowly peeled back the layers of corrosion, revealing a breathtaking sight within. It was not one solid piece, but a symphony of moving parts, a dazzling collection of at least 37 perfectly interlocking bronze gears, some with teeth barely a millimeter long, all arranged with the precision of a master clockmaker. Inscriptions, nearly invisible to the naked eye, covered every available surface, forming what appeared to be a detailed instruction manual. The official, mainstream conclusion is itself a marvel of history. Scholars now agree that this device, the Antikythera mechanism, was the world's first known analog computer. It was an intricate astronomical calculator of astonishing genius. By turning a hand crank on its side, an ancient user could track the movements of the sun and the moon through the zodiac, predict solar and lunar eclipses with startling accuracy, and even keep track of the 4-year cycle of the Pan-Hellenic Games, including the Olympics. The front face displayed the heavens, while the back revealed complex calendar cycles like the Metonic and Saros cycles, essential for long-term astronomical prediction. To be clear, even this accepted explanation places the mechanism as an artifact of unparalleled sophistication. It is a testament to the forgotten genius of Hellenistic Greece, a civilization that could clearly achieve heights we are only just beginning to appreciate. The device is a masterpiece, a lone summit of achievement in a landscape we thought we understood. And yet, for every answer the mechanism provides, it unearths a dozen more, far more unsettling questions. The first and most profound is its sheer, shocking isolation. If the ancient Greeks, 2,100 years ago, possessed the scientific knowledge and metallurgical skill to build this, where is the evidence of its evolution? Technological progress is never a single miraculous leap. It is a slow, methodical climb. The first steam engine was not a high-speed locomotive, it was a crude, clanking prototype. The first airplane was not a supersonic jet. But with the Antikythera mechanism, we have no prototypes. We have no simpler, earlier versions. There are no contemporary accounts from a Plato or an Aristotle describing the workshops where such cosmic clocks were being designed.
There is only this one, perfect, impossibly advanced machine, followed by 1,500 years of nothing. The next time a device of comparable complexity appears in the historical record, it is in the great astronomical clocks of 14th century Europe, over a millennium and a half later. It's as if a modern laptop were discovered in the court of a medieval king. It doesn't just challenge the timeline of technology, it shatters it. It is a technological ghost, a phantom of a future that should not have been. But the mystery deepens beyond the manufacturing. We must ask, what scientific theory powered its gears? The mechanism's predictions are incredibly sophisticated. It even accounts for the variable speed of the moon in its orbit, using a clever system of epicyclic gearing, a pin-and-slot mechanism that was not reinvented until the 19th century. This implies a level of astronomical and mathematical understanding that is far beyond the simple models we attribute to the age. It suggests the creators had access to centuries of meticulous astronomical data and a grasp of celestial mechanics that feels disturbingly modern. Where did this knowledge come from? Was it the singular work of one forgotten genius? Or was it the culmination of a scientific tradition whose other achievements have been utterly erased from history? This leads us to the most compelling and perhaps most controversial alternative theories. One school of thought suggests that the mechanism is not an anomaly at all, but rather the last surviving relic of a widespread and highly advanced Hellenistic technological tradition. Perhaps in the great libraries of Alexandria or Pergamum, scrolls and schematics existed that described not just this device, but countless others. Perhaps the burning of those libraries was not just a loss of literature and philosophy, but the deliberate destruction of a scientific and technological inheritance that plunged the world into a dark age. In this view, the mechanism is the tip of a colossal, sunken iceberg of lost knowledge. But another, more radical theory pushes further. What if the Greeks themselves were not the originators of this knowledge, but its inheritors? What if they were the custodians of a science passed down from a far more ancient and now forgotten source civilization? This theory posits that the underlying principles of astronomy, mathematics, and mechanics encoded in the mechanism were not discovered in the 2nd century BCE, but were rediscovered, a legacy from a much older culture whose global footprint we are only now beginning to find in other impossible structures around the world. The Greeks, with their genius for geometry and mechanics, may have been the ones to perfect the construction of the device, but the foundational science could have come from somewhere else entirely. The Antikythera mechanism is therefore more than just a rusty artifact. It is a profound intellectual challenge. It stands as definitive mechanical proof that a level of scientific thought existed in our ancient past that we have systematically underestimated. It is a gear-driven echo from a lost timeline, a world where the path of human knowledge took a very different turn. It forces us to reconsider the narrative that antiquity was a simple, superstitious time, and accept that at least one mind, or one culture, possessed a key to understanding the cosmos that would be lost for ages. It leaves us staring into the depths of history, holding a piece of a puzzle that seems to come from a different box entirely. It proves with cold, hard mechanical certainty that they could map the heavens with clockwork. And if they could model the vast, intricate dance of the cosmos in a box of bronze, what else could they model? What other secrets of the universe did they understand? And what other marvels did they construct, not from fragile metal, but from the very stone of the earth itself?
In the sun-baked expanse of the Anatolian plains in southeastern Turkey, there is a hill that for millennia was known to locals as nothing more than a gently rounded feature on the landscape, a place they called Potbelly Hill. It was a place of superstition, home to a single sacred tree, but otherwise unremarkable. Farmers had for decades pulled strange, carved stones from their fields, often discarding them as little more than oddly shaped obstacles. They had no way of knowing that they were disturbing the capstones of a secret that would, upon its discovery, detonate our entire understanding of the ancient past. For buried just beneath the thin soil of this unassuming hill was not a village, not a tomb, but something far older and infinitely more profound. A sprawling complex of massive, T-shaped limestone pillars arranged in great ceremonial circles, some weighing more than 50 tons. They're carved with an artist's hand, depicting a haunting menagerie of fierce predators, lions, scorpions, spiders, and vultures, all captured in stylized high relief. This is Göbekli Tepe, and its very existence is impossible. Radiocarbon dating places the construction of its oldest layers at around 9600 BC. Let that date settle in your mind for a moment. This is not 1,000 or 2,000 years before the pyramids of Giza. This is 7,000 years before them. It is 6,000 years older than Stonehenge. It predates the invention of writing, the invention of pottery, the invention of the wheel, and even the dawn of agriculture itself. It was built in a time when humanity, according to our history books, was supposed to be nothing more than small, scattered bands of primitive hunter-gatherers, living hand-to-mouth, incapable of conceiving, let alone executing, a project of this scale and complexity. The mainstream archaeological view, pioneered by its late discoverer, the brilliant Klaus Schmidt, is in itself a revolutionary theory. Schmidt called Göbekli Tepe the world's first cathedral on a hill. He proposed that the conventional timeline of civilization was in fact backward.
We have always assumed that agriculture came first, creating sedentary communities and surplus food, which then allowed for the development of complex religion and monumental architecture. But Göbekli Tepe flips that script entirely. Schmidt theorized that it was the shared desire to build this sacred place that was the catalyst for civilization itself. Hunter-gatherer tribes from a 100-mile radius would have converged here, a monumental collaborative effort that required a level of social organization previously believed to be unthinkable for the era. The sheer logistical demand of feeding so many workers for so long, Schmidt argued, is what forced humanity to innovate, to domesticate wild grasses, to cultivate the land, to invent agriculture not as a happy accident, but out of spiritual necessity. In this view, it was the quest for meaning, the construction of this temple, that ultimately gave birth to the settled world we know today. It's a powerful and compelling narrative, and for many it is where the story ends.
But it is also where the deeper, more unsettling questions begin. For the more we scrutinize the details of Göbekli Tepe, the more the conventional explanation begins to fray at the edges. First, there is the staggering question of engineering. We must be clear about what we are discussing. We are talking about a pre-metal, pre-wheel, pre-beast of burden society, quarrying monolithic pillars of limestone, some as tall as a giraffe, from a bedrock quarry a kilometer away. They would then have to transport these 50-ton blocks uphill and then lift them into place with a precision that would challenge modern engineers. How? What techniques were used to hew these stones so cleanly? What method of transport, what system of levers and ropes could possibly have been employed by a people whose toolkit consisted of little more than flint and wood? The sheer manpower required is one thing, but the level of geometric knowledge, planning, and project management is something else entirely. This was not the work of a disorganized mob. This was the work of masters. Then there is the art itself. The carvings at Göbekli Tepe are not the crude etchings of a nascent culture finding its artistic voice. They are sophisticated, complex, and deeply symbolic. These are not simple representations of the animals they hunted. They are powerful archetypes woven into what appears to be a complex and coherent mythology. On one of the most famous pillars, Pillar 43, we see a chilling scene. A large vulture stands beside a headless human figure. Researchers have noted that in many ancient cultures of the region, the vulture was not a scavenger, but a psychopomp, a creature that carried the souls of the dead to the heavens. Is this a depiction of a celestial journey, a ritual sacrifice, or something more? The level of abstract thought required to create such a layered narrative is immense. These were not primitive minds. They were minds as complex and as capable of symbolic thought as our own. And perhaps the strangest riddle of all is what happened to it. After 1,500 years of use, the builders of Göbekli Tepe did something inexplicable. They did not abandon their temple to the winds of time. Instead, they deliberately and painstakingly buried it. Over generations, they backfilled the entire site with millions of cubic feet of earth, stone chippings, and animal bones, perfectly preserving the circles and their monolithic pillars as if they were creating a time capsule. The effort required to bury the site was likely as monumental as the effort it took to build it. Why? Why create something so magnificent, the center of your world for 60 generations, only to intentionally entomb it? What were they protecting it from? Or what knowledge were they sealing away for a future time? It is when we confront these anomalies, the impossible engineering, the symbolic sophistication, and the deliberate burial, that alternative theories begin to emerge from the academic fringe.
Theories that, while speculative, seem to address the questions that the mainstream view leaves unanswered. Some researchers, like author Graham Hancock, have proposed that Göbekli Tepe is not the work of local hunter-gatherers at all, at least not alone.
They suggest that it may be the work of the survivors of a long-lost, highly advanced civilization that was almost wiped out by a global cataclysm at the end of the last ice age, an event known as the Younger Dryas. In this scenario, Göbekli Tepe is not a temple built to inspire the invention of agriculture. It is a repository of knowledge, a message, a desperate attempt by the few who remembered a former world to pass on their wisdom, particularly their wisdom of the skies. This theory reframes the entire site. The animals on the pillars are no longer just animals. They are constellations. The vulture, the scorpion, the fox. They are the ancient symbols for Sagittarius, Scorpio, and other star patterns. Göbekli Tepe becomes a functioning astronomical observatory, a machine for tracking precession, the slow 26,000-year wobble of the Earth's axis. This is knowledge that our own civilization only rediscovered in the last few centuries. That chilling image on Pillar 43, the vulture and the headless man, takes on a terrifying new meaning. Proponents of this theory have used astronomical software to show that the arrangement of the constellations on that pillar forms a precise star map, a date stamp. It points to the sky as it would have looked around 10,950 BC, the very time that scientists believe a comet fragment swarm struck the Earth, triggering the Younger Dryas and the subsequent cataclysmic floods and global devastation. The pillar, then, is not a ritual scene. It is a memorial, a warning, a detailed account of the day the sky fell. If this interpretation holds even a shred of truth, then Göbekli Tepe is not the dawn of civilization. It is a glimmer of twilight. It is the echo of a forgotten chapter in the human story, a high water mark of knowledge from a time we cannot even imagine. It suggests that human history is not a simple, linear progression from primitive to advanced. It may instead be a tragic cycle of rise and fall, of incredible achievement and devastating loss, with entire epics of our own story erased from memory, leaving behind only enigmatic ghosts of stone. This incredible structure, resting silently beneath the Turkish hill, forces us to confront the most fundamental questions about our own origins. Who were the true architects of this place? Were they hunter-gatherers touched by a spark of divine inspiration? Or were they the inheritors of a dying flame, desperately trying to build a library of stone before the lights of their world went out for good? Only 5% of Göbekli Tepe has been excavated. What other secrets? What other stone pillars covered with cosmic warnings still lie sleeping beneath the earth? Göbekli Tepe stands as a stark, silent rebuke to our own certainty, a reminder that our planet's soil may be a graveyard of forgotten worlds. And it leaves us to wonder, if a structure of this magnitude could be lost to time, what other impossibilities, what other testaments to a past far grander than our own are still waiting to be found?
Deep within the climate-controlled vaults of Yale University's Beinecke Library, an object of profound and frustrating mystery rests in silence. It is not a jewel-encrusted crown, nor a weapon of a long-dead king. It is a small, unassuming book, its vellum pages yellowed and warped by the passage of some 600 years. Bound in limp, unadorned leather, it contains 240 pages of looping, elegant script, written in an ink that has faded from black to a soft earthen brown. This is manuscript MS 408, better known to the world as the Voynich manuscript. and it may be the single most confounding object ever discovered. To open its pages is to step into a world that is at once familiar and yet utterly alien. The book is filled with hundreds of detailed, colorful illustrations organized into distinct sections. There are botanical drawings of plants and flowers that bear a passing resemblance to our own, yet not a single one has ever been conclusively identified by botanists. There are astronomical charts of stars and zodiacs arranged in patterns that do not match any known celestial map. There are diagrams of what appear to be biological processes, some only visible today with a microscope. And most famously, there is the balneological section, page after page of small, naked female figures bathing in pools and elaborate plumbing systems, connected by conduits that flow with a strange green liquid. And then there is the text itself. Every page is filled with it. It flows with a natural grace as if written by a confident and practiced hand. It has all the hallmarks of a genuine language. There are distinct words, a consistent alphabet of around 20 to 30 unique glyphs, and a structure that suggests a working grammar. Yet for all its apparent coherence, it is completely, maddeningly unreadable. Not one word of it has ever been deciphered. It is a book filled with knowledge that remains perfectly and perhaps permanently locked away, a silent sentinel from a forgotten world. The mainstream academic view treats the manuscript with cautious skepticism. Carbon dating of the vellum places its creation squarely in the early 14th century, between 1404 and 1438. Its known history, or provenance, begins in the late 16th century at the court of the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II of Prague, a man obsessed with alchemy and the occult. From there, it passed through the hands of alchemists, scholars, and Jesuits, each one failing to unlock its secrets until it was purchased from a collection in Italy in 1912 by the Polish antique book dealer for whom it is now named Wilfrid Voynich. The consensus explanation therefore falls into one of two camps. The first, and the most cynical, is that the manuscript is an elaborate and brilliant hoax. A meaningless gibberish text created in the 15th or 16th century specifically to defraud a wealthy patron like Emperor Rudolf, who was known to pay handsomely for esoteric artifacts. The creator, this theory argues, simply invented an alphabet and scribbled nonsense, adding bizarre drawings to make it seem more profound than it was. The second, more generous theory is that the text is not a language at all, but a code. It is an existing text, perhaps a controversial herbal or an alchemical treatise, that has been encrypted using a complex cipher to protect its secrets from the uninitiated or the eyes of the church. The author was real. The knowledge was real. It is simply hidden behind a cryptographic veil. For decades, these two explanations have formed the foundation of all serious study into the manuscript.
But the deeper one looks, the more these simple explanations begin to fray and fall apart. Let us first consider the hoax theory. To create such a document would be a monumental undertaking. The vellum and inks are authentically of the period, meaning it was an incredibly expensive and time-consuming object to produce. The text itself is over 200 pages long, comprising more than 170,000 individual glyphs. Who would dedicate years of their life and a small fortune to a prank with no guaranteed payoff? More damningly, the text doesn't behave like gibberish. Sophisticated linguistic analysis has shown that the Voynich script adheres to what is known as Zipf's law. This is a statistical pattern found in all known natural languages, where the most frequent word occurs approximately twice as often as the second most frequent word, 3 times as often as the third, and so on. Randomly generated gibberish does not follow this law. The Voynich script
follows it almost perfectly. It also displays clear syntactical rules. Certain characters appear only at the beginning of words, others only at the end. Some letter combinations are common, while others are forbidden. This level of internal consistency and linguistic structure is fantastically, almost impossibly complex for a mere hoax. Then there is the cipher theory. This seems more plausible until you realize who has tried and failed to crack it. During the height of the Cold War, the manuscript was studied by the United States' most brilliant cryptographers at the National Security Agency. Men like William Friedman, who led the team that broke Japan's Purple Code during World War II, dedicated years of their retirement to the puzzle, applying every cryptographic technique they knew. They came away with nothing. In the modern era, the most powerful computers and artificial intelligence algorithms have been unleashed on the text, attempting to identify it as a substitution cipher, a polyalphabetic cipher, or any other form of encryption. Every single attempt has failed. The text resists decryption because, quite simply, it doesn't behave like any known code. Its entropy, the measure of its randomness, is actually lower than that of languages like Latin or English, suggesting it is not a cipher designed to obscure, but a language meant to communicate. With the mainstream theories riddled with such profound holes, we are forced to look beyond the conventional, to consider possibilities that are far more unsettling. One theory is that we are not looking at a code at all, but at a lost natural language, a language from a culture or a people who have been completely erased from the historical record, leaving this book as their final, solitary testament. This would explain the text's linguistic consistency and its resistance to cryptographic attack. We cannot decipher it because there is no key, no underlying text to revert to. It is simply itself. The unidentifiable plants and stars would then be the flora and fauna of this lost people's homeland, a place unknown to the rest of the world. Another, more esoteric theory suggests the book is a work of glossolalia, or speaking in tongues, that it was channeled by a mystic or a visionary in a trance-like state who transcribed a language that was not of this world. This could explain the bizarre imagery and the unique, unearthly script. It would be less a work of science or scholarship, and more a direct transmission from another plane of existence, a map of a spiritual or psychological landscape.
But perhaps the most startling theory emerges from the drawings themselves. Some researchers, examining the illustrations under high magnification, have claimed to identify structures that should have been impossible for a 15th century artist to know. In the botanical section, they see detailed depictions of plant cells and capillaries. In the astronomical section, they see what looks like a spiral galaxy, a concept that wouldn't be understood until the invention of powerful telescopes centuries later. In the biological section, they see shapes that are eerily similar to human ova and sperm. If these interpretations are correct, then the Voynich manuscript is not just an anomalous text. It is an out-of-place artifact of the highest order. It would be a compendium of scientific knowledge that predates its own discovery by half a millennium. And if that is true, then the Voynich manuscript ceases to be an isolated curiosity. It becomes something more. It takes its place alongside the impossible clockwork of Antikythera and the impossibly ancient temple of Göbekli Tepe. It becomes another piece of evidence for a forgotten chapter in the human story. A chapter where knowledge of biology, astronomy, and perhaps the very fabric of reality was far more advanced than we are taught to believe. The manuscript wouldn't be a hoax or a simple cipher. It would be a legacy, a deliberate act of preservation, encoding advanced knowledge in a form that could survive the ravages of time, waiting for a future generation to finally understand. Its uncrackable code would not be a puzzle.
but a lock for which we have not yet found the key. The book now sits in its glass case at Yale, its secrets held in a perfect 600-year-long silence. It is a profound intellectual challenge and a deeply humbling artifact. It reminds us that for all our accumulated knowledge, for all our technological prowess, there are still mysteries that stand defiant, mocking our certainty. It forces us to ask one of the most fundamental questions of all. What else have we lost? What other entire libraries of knowledge, what other systems of understanding have vanished into the mists of time, leaving behind only a single inscrutable volume? What knowledge could be so precious or so dangerous that it had to be preserved in a language that to us does not exist? While this manuscript whispers of secrets hidden in ink and vellum, other artifacts from our ancient past tell of a different kind of lost knowledge, a power that wasn't written on a page, but was instead built into clay pots and carved into the stone walls of Egyptian temples, whispering of a forgotten energy source that could once light up the world.
Deep within the quiet, climate-controlled halls of the National Museum of Iraq, amidst the splendor of Mesopotamian gold and the silent grandeur of Sumerian statues, sits a collection of unassuming artifacts. They're small, easily overlooked, a humble terracotta pot, barely 6 inches tall, discovered in 1936 in a village near Baghdad. For decades, they were cataloged and stored away, dismissed as little more than ordinary clay vessels. Mainstream archaeology, when it considered them at all, concluded they were likely used for storing sacred scrolls. Their internal components, a copper cylinder and an iron rod, perhaps intended to protect the delicate papyrus from the ravages of time. A simple, logical explanation for a simple, mundane object, a closed case. But history is rarely so simple. A closer examination of these storage jars reveals a design that is anything but mundane. It is a design that is shockingly, profoundly familiar to any modern student of science. Inside the earthenware pot, a sheet of copper is rolled into a cylinder. The cylinder is sealed at the bottom with a bitumen plug, an ancient asphalt that acts as a waterproof and insulating sealant. Suspended in the center of this copper cylinder, but not touching it, is an iron rod, also held in place by a bitumen stopper at the top. The only thing missing from this construction is a liquid. If one were to pour a simple acidic solution inside, something as readily available in the ancient world as grape juice, vinegar, or lemon juice, a remarkable transformation would occur. An electrochemical reaction would begin. A measurable electric current would flow. This isn't speculation, it's science. The arrangement of two different metals suspended in an electrolyte is the fundamental principle of a galvanic cell, what we today call a battery. In the years since its rediscovery as a scientific curiosity, numerous replicas of the Baghdad battery have been built, and they all work. Depending on the electrolyte used, they can generate a consistent voltage, typically between 0.5 and 1.5 volts. It's a small amount of power, to be sure, not enough to power a city or even a home, but it is undeniably electricity.
The implications of this are staggering. The artifacts are dated to the Parthian period, somewhere between 250 BC and 250 AD. This places the invention of the battery a full 1,800 years before the Italian physicist Alessandro Volta created his voltaic pile in the year 1800. It suggests that a form of electricity was not just a theoretical concept, but a practical reality in the ancient world. The immediate question, of course, is why? For what purpose would an ancient civilization need a low-voltage battery? The mainstream explanation, that they are simply storage jars, begins to crumble under the weight of its own improbability. Why create such a complex three-part device with insulating seals and specific non-corrosive metals when a simple clay pot with a lid would suffice for storing scrolls?
The design seems intentionally and uniquely electric. One of the most compelling alternative theories is electroplating, or gilding. By connecting several of these batteries in series, one could generate enough current to apply a micro-thin layer of gold or silver onto a less precious metal. This would have been a form of sacred alchemy, a way of creating beautiful, seemingly solid gold artifacts for religious or royal purposes at a fraction of the cost. And crucially, we find evidence of just that. Numerous artifacts from ancient Mesopotamia and the surrounding regions have been found with exquisitely thin layers of gold so perfectly bonded that archaeologists have struggled to explain the technique used. The Baghdad battery provides a powerful, elegant, and technologically plausible answer. But perhaps its purpose was something more ethereal. Some researchers have pointed towards their potential use in religious rituals. The small electrical charge produced by the battery can be felt as a mild tingle or buzz when the terminals are touched. Imagine a priest presenting a statue of a god to a crowd of worshippers. When they touch the idol, they feel a strange, otherworldly vibration, a palpable energy emanating from the divine figure. It would have been a deeply profound and mysterious experience, a physical manifestation of the god's power, made possible by a secret, sacred technology. This single anomalous artifact from Baghdad is unsettling enough. It hints at a pocket of lost knowledge, a forgotten branch of ancient science. But it is not alone. Half a world away, buried deep beneath the sands of Egypt, lies an even more profound and visual mystery. A clue that suggests the Parthians may not have been the only ancient culture to have flirted with the fire of the gods. To find it, we must travel to the Dendera Temple Complex, one of the best preserved sites in all of Egypt. It is a place of breathtaking beauty, dedicated to the goddess Hathor. Its ceilings are covered with intricate astronomical charts, its walls with vibrant reliefs depicting the pharaohs and the gods. But the greatest secret of Dendera is not out in the open. It lies hidden from the sun, down a narrow, claustrophobic staircase that descends into a series of subterranean crypts. These chambers are dark, cramped, and were sealed for millennia. And on their walls is a depiction so strange, so out of place, that it has fueled intense debate for decades. It is known as the Dendera Light. The reliefs show large, clear, bulbous objects, each resting on a stand. Inside each bulb, a long, wavy snake is shown leaping forth. The tail of the snake appears to connect to a cable-like cord that runs from the base of the bulb to a small box-like object, which is often depicted being attended to by a priest or a god. The entire apparatus is supported by what is known as a jed pillar, a symbol in Egyptian mythology often associated with stability and the backbone of the god Osiris.
The orthodox Egyptological interpretation is purely symbolic. The bulb, they say, is a lotus flower, a symbol of creation. The snake emerging from it represents the fertility god Harsamtus. The entire scene, they argue, is a complex visual metaphor for the Egyptian creation myth. It is a beautiful and poetic explanation, consistent with the rich, symbolic language of ancient Egypt. But look closer. The details defy simple mythography. The lotus flower is depicted as perfectly transparent, a feature not typically associated with the flower in other Egyptian art. The snake inside bears an uncanny resemblance to the filament of an early incandescent light bulb. The cable is intricately braided and appears to plug directly into the power pack or jed pillar. And most tellingly, the figures are shown holding these objects aloft, as if they are illuminating the darkness of the crypt. This leads to the most provocative and challenging question of all. Could the ancient Egyptians have had a form of electric lighting? It seems like an impossible leap, and yet the evidence presents a compelling case.
One of the great enduring mysteries of Egyptology is the complete lack of soot on the ceilings of the inner tombs and chambers. These rooms are often decorated with the most intricate and brilliantly colored paintings, work that would have required a powerful, consistent, and clean source of light for countless hours. The standard explanation involves teams of workers using a complex system of reflective copper mirrors to bounce sunlight deep into the tombs. While theoretically possible for some of the upper chambers, it becomes entirely impractical for the deepest, most complex passageways and sealed crypts like the one at Dendera. Torches or oil lamps would have been the only other option, and they would have left thick, black deposits of soot, choking the air and obscuring the very art they were meant to illuminate. Yet, no such soot is found. The ceilings are pristine. It's as if the darkness was held at bay by a source of light that produced no flame. The Dendera reliefs in this context transform from mere symbols into something far more profound, a schematic diagram. The bulb becomes a high-quality glass tube, perhaps a type of Crookes tube. The snake becomes an ionized plasma filament, glowing as an electrical current passes through it. The braided cable is a conductor, and the jed pillar becomes an electrical insulator, or even a source of high-voltage static electricity. This isn't just a fringe theory. Engineers and physicists have pointed out the striking functional similarities between the ancient reliefs and modern electrical equipment. They argue that if you were to ask a modern electrical engineer to draw a diagram of a large-scale gas discharge lamp, they might produce something strikingly similar to what we see on the walls of the Dendera crypt. Taken together, the Baghdad Battery and the Dendera Light paint an unsettling picture. They are whispers of a lost science, a forgotten chapter of human ingenuity. They suggest that our ancestors were not the primitive people we often imagine them to be, but were sophisticated thinkers, experimenters, and engineers who may have understood the fundamental forces of the universe in ways we are only just beginning to appreciate. This was likely not a widespread industrial technology. The knowledge was probably guarded fiercely by the priesthoods, a form of sacred science used to create wonders, inspire awe, and demonstrate a tangible connection to the divine. It was a power that could literally create light from the darkness.
This knowledge, like so much else from the ancient world, appears to have vanished. Was it lost in the collapse of civilizations, the burning of great libraries like the one at Alexandria? Or was it deliberately suppressed, deemed too powerful for the uninitiated? We are left with only these faint, electrifying traces, a simple clay pot in a museum and a strange carving in a dark crypt. They are technological ghosts, haunting the edges of our historical understanding. They force us to wonder what other secrets, what other forgotten powers lie dormant beneath the sands of time, waiting for us to ask the right questions. The evidence for this ancient power source is as persistent as it is controversial. But if ancient cultures truly did harness such a force, it raises an even more profound question. Where did this knowledge come from? Was it the result of a slow, independent development, a secret history of science unfolding in the shadows? Or could it be the remnant of something far older, a legacy technology inherited from a civilization that came before them? Our journey has shown us impossible machines and structures that defy their supposed timelines. Now we must confront the most shocking evidence of all. Buildings and monoliths crafted with a precision so perfect it rivals and in some cases surpasses our own modern capabilities. We must travel high into the Andes, to a windswept plateau
where the ruins of an impossible city await. A city that some believe was not built by human hands at all. High in the Bolivian Andes, nearly 13,000 feet above the sea, the world is stripped down to its essentials. The air is thin, sharp, and cold. The sky is an unforgiving, crystalline blue. And the landscape is a sweeping vista of muted browns and golds, a plateau so vast and empty it feels like the surface of another planet. It is here, in this stark and windswept wilderness, that you find the ruins of a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. This is Puma Punku. To call it a ruin is to use a word that feels inadequate. It is less a city and more a scene of geological chaos, a field of scattered, broken monoliths. Massive slabs of stone, some weighing over 100 tons, lie toppled and fractured, as though a primordial giant had thrown his building blocks to the ground in a fit of rage. Yet, as you draw closer, the chaos resolves into a terrifying, confounding order. You begin to see not just broken rocks, but shattered perfection. You see H-shaped blocks of diorite, one of the hardest stones on Earth, carved with a precision that defies belief. You see straight lines, perfect right angles, and smooth, almost polished surfaces that feel utterly alien in this ancient landscape. This is the mystery of Puma Punku, a place that should not, cannot exist. The mainstream archaeological narrative places Puma Punku as a part of the great Tiwanaku civilization, a pre-Incan culture that flourished in this region from roughly 500 to 1000 AD. According to this view, Puma Punku was a grand ceremonial center, a complex of temples and monuments built to honor their deities and track the cosmos. The builders, we are told, were a people of the Stone Age. Their tools were primitive, but their will was strong. Academics propose that these immense stone blocks were laboriously quarried miles away, then dragged to the site using little more than log rollers, rope, and immense manpower. The intricate carvings and impossible angles, the story goes, were achieved through a painstaking process of chipping away with stone hammers and bronze chisels. The final glass-like finish was accomplished by patiently grinding the surfaces with sand and water over countless generations. It is a testament, they say, to what human ingenuity and devotion can achieve, even with the most basic of tools. It is a plausible, accepted, and comfortably terrestrial explanation. But then, you look closer at the stone.
And that is where the comfortable explanation shatters into 1,000 irreconcilable pieces. The first and most glaring problem is the stone itself. The primary materials used here are andesite and diorite. On the Mohs scale of mineral hardness, which ranges from 1 to 10, these stones register between a 6 and a 7. The bronze chisels, supposedly used by the Tiwanaku people, have a hardness of barely 4. It is a simple physical impossibility. Attempting to carve diorite with a bronze chisel is like trying to carve steel with a plastic knife. You would blunt the tool long before you made a meaningful mark on the stone. Yet here, we have not just marks, but intricate multi-ton sculptures. Then there is the precision. These are not simply blocks stacked upon one another. They are interlocking pieces of a colossal, three-dimensional puzzle. The famous H blocks are so uniform that they appear to be mass-produced, created from a single, standardized template. They feature perfectly flat planes, razor-sharp interior and exterior corners, and complex interlocking joints
that would be a challenge for a modern engineer using computer-aided design and diamond-tipped power tools. At Puma Punku, we find grooves barely a millimeter wide, running perfectly straight for several feet. We find holes drilled with such perfection that they appear to have been bored out by a high-speed drill, not slowly hollowed out by hand. Where are the tool marks? Where are the telltale signs of hammering and chipping? They are absent. The surfaces are preternaturally smooth. The cuts are surgically clean. The mainstream account of stone hammers and bronze chisels simply does not align with the physical evidence left behind. It's not just improbable, it defies the very laws of physics and material science. And even if we were to ignore the impossible craftsmanship, we are left with the logistical nightmare. The largest single stone at Puma Punku weighs an estimated 131 tons. The primary quarry for this andesite is located nearly 10 miles away. How did a culture without the wheel, without draft animals, and in a high-altitude environment with no large trees for rollers, transport hundreds of these multi-ton blocks across such a distance? The mathematical and engineering challenges are staggering. To suggest this was done with brute force and simple tools is not an explanation. It is a dismissal of a profound and inconvenient truth. The stones themselves tell a different story. They speak not of primitive tools, but of a technology so advanced, it is indistinguishable from magic. When the established theory fails so completely to account for the evidence, we are forced to look elsewhere for answers. We must dare to ask the questions that challenge the foundations of our historical timeline. What if the builders of Puma Punku were not a Stone Age people at all? What if they possessed a lost technology? Some researchers have speculated about the use of sonic or vibrational tools, technologies that could soften stone, allowing it to be molded and cut with ease, almost like clay. This would explain the lack of tool marks and the incredible precision, a process more akin to casting than to carving.
Another, more profound theory is that the Tiwanaku culture did not build Puma Punku at all. Perhaps they simply found it. Perhaps they were the inheritors of a site that was already ancient, beyond their comprehension, the last remnant of a far older and far more advanced predecessor civilization. This would explain why the style of Puma Punku is so radically different from other Tiwanaku structures in the area. It stands alone, an orphan of time. If this was the work of an earlier, lost civilization, then what technology did they possess? The precision-cut blocks, the prefabricated and interlocking pieces, they are the hallmarks of modern machine manufacturing. Was it possible that a forgotten people once operated a kind of quarry factory here, on the roof of the world, shaping the very mountains with machines we can only dream of? The evidence etched into every surface at Puma Punku whispers that this may be the case. It is a silent stone testament to a chapter of human history that has been entirely erased. This pattern of impossible stonework is not confined to the desolate plains of the Altiplano. It is a global phenomenon. We see it in the colossal polygonal walls of Sacsayhuaman in Peru, in the perfectly joined granite casing stones of the Great Pyramid in Egypt, and in the subterranean chambers of the Serapeum. All over the world we find these same fingerprints of a lost technology, a master builder's signature that connects these ancient sites across vast oceans and millennia. Puma Punku is not an anomaly. It is perhaps the most undeniable and stunning piece of a global puzzle. It suggests a shared heritage, a source of knowledge and capability that once spanned the entire planet before vanishing into the mists of a great forgetting. The ruins of Puma Punku, therefore, leave us standing at a profound crossroads of understanding. Do we accept a narrative that defies physics and logic,
Or do we accept that our ancestors were capable of things we can no longer explain? The site is more than a ruin. It is a message written in a language of impossible engineering, a silent challenge to our perception of the past. If the stones of Punku are a language we can't yet read, what other messages have been written across the face of the earth, waiting to be seen not from the ground, but from high above?
There are places on this earth where the ground itself speaks, where the soil and rock have been shaped into a message so vast it defies human scale. To walk upon it is to be lost in a meaningless labyrinth of shallow lines and cleared stones. But from a vantage point high above, a vantage point supposedly unattainable by its creators, the message becomes terrifyingly clear. This is the Nazca Desert in southern Peru, a sun-scorched canvas of red-brown earth stretching for hundreds of square miles. And etched upon its surface is one of the greatest and most baffling enigmas of the ancient world. A colossal art gallery, not for humans on the ground, but for someone or something looking down from the heavens. Here we find the famous geoglyphs. A hummingbird, its wings forever frozen in mid-beat, stretching over 300 feet. A spider, depicted with the anatomical precision of a biologist, so detailed that one of its legs is a reproductive organ found only on a specific, rare species of arachnid. A monkey with a spiraling tail, a stalking condor, a whale. More than 800 straight lines, 300 geometric figures, and 70 distinct designs of animals and plants are carved into the arid pampas. Each one was created with a deceptive simplicity. The artists removed the rust-colored iron oxide pebbles that coat the desert floor, exposing the lighter, clay-colored earth beneath. Most astonishingly, many of these immense figures were drawn using a single, continuous, unbroken line, a feat of surveying and perspective that is difficult to comprehend. The lines themselves are often only inches deep, preserved for millennia by a unique combination of a dry, windless climate and the protective shield of the pebbles, which absorb the sun's heat and create a cushion of stable air near the surface. So, who created them? And, more importantly, why? The accepted academic consensus attributes these magnificent works to the Nazca culture, a civilization that flourished in the region from roughly 500 BCE to 500 CE. Archaeologists propose that the Nazca people, using simple tools and rudimentary surveying techniques, were able to meticulously plan and execute these designs on a massive scale. Small-scale models may have been created first, then enlarged using grids of wooden stakes and lengths of rope to maintain proportions and ensure straight lines. It was a monumental undertaking, requiring immense social organization and a deep, driving purpose. That purpose, according to mainstream theory, was overwhelmingly religious and ritualistic. The lines, it is said, were not meant to be seen from above, but to be walked upon. They were ceremonial pathways, sacred routes for religious processions to appease the gods who resided in the mountains and controlled the most vital of resources, water. The animal figures were likely effigies of these powerful deities or spirits, created as offerings to ensure fertile crops and a successful harvest in one of the driest places on Earth. Some researchers have also drawn compelling connections between the glyphs and celestial constellations, suggesting the entire desert floor may have functioned as a colossal astronomical map, tracking the sun, the moon, and the stars to determine the ritual calendar. It is a plausible and elegant theory, a testament to the ingenuity and spiritual devotion of a people trying to make sense of their world and survive within it. And it would be a perfectly satisfactory explanation, if not for the overwhelming anomalies that it simply cannot account for. The first and most glaring problem is one of perspective. The intricate beauty and symbolic power of the Nazca figures are entirely lost on the ground. They are incoherent. They only resolve into a recognizable image when viewed from an altitude of several hundred, if not thousands, of feet.
How then did a culture with no known technology of flight design and execute perfect figures they themselves could never fully see? Some have proposed they may have used hot air balloons, citing the discovery of what could be ancient fire pits and pieces of fabric. But even if this were true, a primitive, uncontrollable balloon drifting on the wind is a far cry from a stable aerial platform needed for the kind of precision surveying this project would demand. It fails to explain the flawless symmetry and the unbroken lines. The creators of the Nazca lines acted as if they possessed a photograph of the land, a blueprint seen from the sky. But the animal figures, for all their fame, are only a tiny fraction of the mystery. The true enigma of Nazca lies in the lines. Thousands upon thousands of them, perfectly straight lines that shoot across the desert for miles, maintaining their integrity with a precision that modern surveyors would find challenging. These lines intersect, forming complex geometric shapes, triangles, rectangles, and, most bizarrely, enormous trapezoids that look for all the world like ancient runways. What ritual purpose is served by walking a dead straight line for 9 miles, especially when that line ignores the natural landscape entirely, climbing up and over hills, dipping into ravines, and emerging on the other side without the slightest deviation? This is not the behavior of people creating a path of least resistance. This is the work of a people imposing a perfect abstract geometry upon the earth, for a reason that is utterly alien to us. And then there is the scale of it all. The sheer, obsessive, almost manic creation of these markings across an area of nearly 200 square miles. The effort is staggering. It seems to go far beyond simple religious ceremony. And just when the Nazca enigma seems insurmountably strange, we discover it is not unique. Travel 500 miles southeast, across the border into Bolivia, to the base of the sacred volcano, Mount Sajama. Here, etched onto the high-altitude plains of the Altiplano, is a phenomenon that makes Nazca look like a practice sketch. These are the Sajama lines, a sprawling, interconnected network of thousands of perfectly straight lines, some running for up to 10 miles. They are older, more numerous, and cover an area nearly 15 times larger than Nazca. Created by the ancestors of the Aymara people, this web of pathways radiate out from the volcano, connecting ancient villages, shrines, and burial towers. The entire landscape is a circuit board of straight lines, forming a grid of breathtaking size and complexity. Once again, these lines are perfectly straight, laid down over punishing, uneven terrain, as if the hills and valleys simply weren't there.
What we are looking at is not a local curiosity. It is a continent-spanning practice of geometric earth carving on a scale that borders on the unbelievable. A practice whose true purpose remains a profound mystery. When the mainstream explanation fails to satisfy the evidence, we must be willing to ask more daring questions. If the lines were not simply ritual pathways, what were they? One compelling theory suggests that the Nazca and Sajama plains were not just ceremonial centers, but vast astronomical observatories. The pioneering researcher Maria Reich dedicated her life to this idea, believing the lines aligned with solstices, equinoxes, and the rising and setting of significant stars. In this model, the desert floor was a map of the heavens, a tool for predicting cosmic events with a forgotten science of celestial mechanics. It's an idea that grants the creators a higher level of scientific knowledge, but still struggles to explain the thousands of lines with no apparent astronomical alignment. A more radical theory looks at the lines not as maps of the sky, but as maps of the Earth. Could this be evidence of a lost science of geodesy, the science of measuring and understanding the Earth's geometric shape? Proponents suggest the lines may be tracking terrestrial energies, so-called ley lines, or perhaps even served as part of a global positioning system, a grid known to a civilization far more advanced than we imagine. The line's indifference to topography suddenly makes a kind of sense if their purpose was to mark a precise coordinate, not to provide a path. And then there is the theory that one cannot ignore, for it speaks to the most obvious interpretation of the visual evidence, a theory popularized and often ridiculed by writers like Eric von Daniken. What if these markings were created for those who travel not on land, but through the air? Could the enormous trapezoids and long straight clearings be exactly what they look like to our 21st century eyes? Runways? Signposts for celestial navigators? The small figure of a humanoid figure with large owl-like eyes, dubbed the astronaut, suddenly takes on a more literal and unsettling meaning. This is the forbidden edge of archaeology, the point where we must choose between a complex, unexplained ritual or a simple technological purpose that would shatter our understanding of the ancient world. We are left with a profound paradox. Markings made with simple Stone Age technology, yet designed with a perspective that seems to require flight. Lines that were sacred pathways for ancient peoples, yet which ignore the very landscape those peoples lived on. A message etched into the earth on a scale so grand its authors could never have seen it, leaving us to wonder, for whom was this message intended? Were they mapping the subtle energies of the earth or the grand movements of the cosmos? Were they sacred pathways for priests on the ground, or were they navigational aids for pilots in the sky? The figures and lines of Nazca and Sajama remain silent, their purpose lost to the winds of time. They are a question written upon the face of the planet. And this leads us to the most unsettling possibility of all. Are these massive earthworks, these impossible megaliths, and these out-of-place artifacts we have examined truly the work of disparate, isolated cultures, each stumbling upon the same inexplicable obsessions? Or are we looking at the scattered, fading signatures of a single, coherent intelligence, the last remnants of a phantom civilization that once commanded the globe?
We have journeyed through the dark recesses of history, standing before objects and structures that defy the simple, linear story we've been told. The clockwork of the cosmos from a Roman shipwreck, a temple of impossible age on the Turkish plains, stones cut with a precision that seems to mock the primitive tools assigned to their creation. Each discovery, on its own, is a profound and unsettling mystery, a puzzle for a generation of scholars to debate. But now, we must take a step back. We must look not at the individual trees, but at the entire, sprawling, impossible forest. For when viewed together, these anomalies begin to form a pattern, a ghostly resonance that echoes across continents and millennia. They cease to be isolated curiosities and instead become something else entirely, the scattered clues of a single overarching enigma. Is it possible that we are not looking at the disparate works of unconnected cultures, but at the faint, lingering fingerprints of one globally distributed and now forgotten parent civilization?
Conventional archaeology, when faced with striking similarities between ancient, unconnected cultures, offers a handful of standard explanations. The first and most common is the theory of independent invention. This idea posits that the human mind, faced with similar environmental challenges and possessing the same cognitive toolkit, will naturally arrive at similar solutions. Humans everywhere need to track the seasons, so they develop astronomy. Pyramids, for instance, are a structurally stable and visually impressive shape, so it's no surprise that different cultures, from Egypt to Mesoamerica, would build them. It's seen as a logical, parallel evolution of thought. When similarities are too specific to be mere coincidence, scholars turn to diffusionism. This is the theory that ideas and technologies spread slowly from one culture to another through ancient pathways of trade, migration, or conflict. A new technique for pottery, a specific religious motif, a method of building. These concepts travel, carried across deserts and oceans over the course of centuries, gradually influencing neighboring societies. In this view, the ancient world was a web of slow, indirect connections, a tapestry woven over immense periods of time. Every similarity, therefore, can be traced back to a point of origin and a long, meandering journey. These explanations are logical, methodical, and form the very bedrock of our modern understanding of the past. They paint a picture of humanity slowly, painstakingly, pulling itself up from the Stone Age, one independent discovery and one slow trade route at a time. But what if that picture is incomplete? What if the evidence we have examined simply refuses to fit within these comfortable frames? The theory of independent invention begins to crumble when we look at the sheer sophistication of the shared knowledge. It is one thing for two cultures to invent the spear. It is another thing entirely for multiple, unconnected societies across the globe to suddenly exhibit a highly advanced and nearly identical understanding of megalithic construction, utilizing multi-ton blocks fitted with mortarless, earthquake-proof precision. We see it in the Andes at Punku, in the temples of Egypt, and in polygonal walls from Japan to Easter Island. This is not a simple, intuitive solution. It is a mastercraft, a form of geological and engineering science that appears fully formed.
Likewise, the diffusionist model strains to the breaking point. The timelines simply do not work. The master astronomers who built Göbekli Tepe existed 6,000 years before the recognized civilizations of Sumer and Egypt. How could their knowledge have been diffused across a gap in time wider than all of recorded history? How do we explain nearly identical artistic motifs found in ancient Peru and ancient Egypt, separated by an ocean that was supposedly an impassable barrier? The diffusion model requires a clear, traceable path. Yet in so many of these cases, the path is missing. The knowledge doesn't spread. It simply appears in disconnected pockets of brilliance, as if it were a memory, an inheritance, rather than a new invention. Are we truly to believe it is a mere coincidence that ancient cultures worldwide, from the Babylonians to the Hopi, all speak of a golden age, a time when the gods walked among men and gifted them the arts of civilization? Is it a coincidence that their stories universally tell of a great cataclysm, most often a world-destroying flood that wiped the slate clean, leaving only a handful of survivors to begin again? The established narrative accounts for some of the evidence, some of the time, but it leaves the most profound, the most paradigm-shattering artifacts as unexplained outliers. The sheer weight of these anomalies eventually forces a critical question. What if the outliers are the story? This leads us to a third, more radical and far more unsettling possibility, a theory that is not born from textbooks, but from the hard evidence on the ground that refuses to be ignored. This is the hypothesis of a lost predecessor civilization. This theory proposes that long before the recognized dawn of history, before Sumer, before Egypt, there existed a highly sophisticated, globally connected maritime civilization, a culture that had mastered sciences we are only now beginning to fully appreciate. Not a civilization of flying machines or laser beams, necessarily, but one with a profound and masterful understanding of astronomy, geology, agriculture, architecture, and perhaps even the subtle energies of the Earth itself. This was the parent culture, the source, The phantom civilization whose legacy is now found only in fragments. In this model, the impossible knowledge we see in ancient Egypt was not invented by the dynastic Egyptians, but inherited by them. The baffling precision of Puma Punku was not the work of the Tiwanaku culture that came later, but the remnants of a far older site they discovered and built upon. The astronomical genius of Göbekli Tepe was not a fluke of hunter-gatherers, but the last gasp of a tradition that was already tens of thousands of years old. This single theory suddenly solves the intractable problems of the mainstream view. The shared megalithic building styles across the world, they all stem from a common source of engineering knowledge. The eerily similar creation myths and flood legends, they are the fragmented, mythologized memories of a real shared global event that brought the predecessor civilization to its knees. The sudden appearance of sophisticated astronomical and agricultural knowledge, it was brought by the survivors of this cataclysm, the so-called culture bearers or wisdom gods mentioned in legends the world over, like Awanes in Mesopotamia or Viracocha in the Andes. This lost civilization wasn't erased by war or famine. It was likely destroyed by a global cataclysm so immense it reset the human story. Evidence points to a period of catastrophic climate upheaval at the end of the last ice age, around 12,000 years ago, known as the Younger Dryas. A period of terrifying global floods, apocalyptic temperature swings, and mass extinctions. A period that aligns almost perfectly with the age of Göbekli Tepe and with Plato's telling of the sinking of Atlantis. What we call the dawn of civilization, around 3000 BCE, may not have been a dawn at all. It may have been a sunrise after a long, dark, and traumatic night, a recovery. A desperate attempt by the scattered, traumatized descendants of a brilliant world to rebuild from the wreckage of a memory they could no longer fully comprehend. We are not a species that rose from primitive beginnings once. We are, perhaps, a species with amnesia, struggling to recall a forgotten chapter of our own magnificent and tragic story. To contemplate this is to experience a profound sense of intellectual vertigo. It reframes everything. The Great Pyramids are not the beginning of a story, but the climax of an older one. The strange lines in the Nazca Desert are not messages to unknown gods, but perhaps an attempt to reactivate an ancient system of knowledge. The Antikythera mechanism is not a bizarre one-off invention, but a precious, surviving example of a technology that was once understood and widespread. These artifacts are not just strange discoveries, they are orphans of a lost world. Each one is a breadcrumb leading us back down a path that history has declared a dead end. They are the echoes of a voice that has been silent for 10,000 years, whispering a single, constant message: you are not the first. We have now followed these echoes, traced these fingerprints, and connected the dots into the chilling outline of a civilization that should not have existed. We have stood on the precipice of a forgotten history, but confronting this possibility forces us to face the final and most crucial question of all. As we look out at our own modern global civilization, so confident in its permanence, what does this phantom past tell us about our own future?
Our journey through the shadows of the past is now drawing to a close. We have sailed the ancient seas and found, in the silent, crushing dark, a clockwork of the cosmos. A machine of impossible genius that whispers of a lost science. We have walked the sacred grounds of Göbekli Tepe, a megalithic temple built by hunter-gatherers on the very precipice of a forgotten age, its stone pillars a silent testament to a forgotten purpose. We have seen the mountains of the Andes, scarred with stonework so precise, so immense, that it defies the very tools and timelines we have ascribed to its builders. We have gazed upon etchings meant only for the eyes of the gods, and held in our minds a codex that speaks in a language that time itself has lost. Each discovery, on its own, is a fascinating puzzle, a historical curiosity to be debated in the quiet halls of academia. But when viewed together, they cease to be isolated anomalies. they become a pattern, a persistent echo in the long corridor of human history. The orthodox view asks us to accept that these staggering leaps of genius, these technological phantoms and architectural marvels were all independent flashes of brilliance, born from primitive cultures only to vanish without a trace. It asks us to believe that humanity achieved the unbelievable and then simply forgot. This explanation, once comforting in its simplicity, begins to feel far more incredible than any alternative. The evidence we have confronted suggests a different story, not a story of isolated incidents, but of a shared foundational legacy, a deep and resonant bass note of knowledge that hums beneath the surface of the ancient world. The clues point not to a dozen lost civilizations, but perhaps to one. A single, precedent-setting culture whose influence was so profound and whose disappearance was so absolute that all who came after them were left to build their own worlds among its enigmatic ruins. We are left staring at a ghost in the machine of history, an intelligence that is undeniably there, yet officially absent. And so, we are left with the most profound mystery of all. Not what these artifacts are or even who made them, but what they represent about us. It seems we are a species with amnesia, living in a house we did not build, surrounded by the faint echoes of a language we no longer remember how to speak. The mainstream narrative tells us to look to the future for the greatest discoveries, to the stars for the ultimate answers. But perhaps the most transformative truth, the revelation that will change everything we know about ourselves, is not to be found in the distant future, but in the depths of our own forgotten past. The unwritten chapters are waiting. The only question is, are we finally ready to read them?